Streaming again. Okay. Um, if you guys navigate to exercise 7 in the solved folder, you'll find an index.js, and inside that solved folder, you guys should see this snippet of code. Um, if I could get everybody's attention, please. Class has started once again. We're going to use the append file function, and this is going to work exactly the way we use the write file function, which is we're going to pass in the file that we want to append to. If that file does not exist, it will be written to. And then we're going to pass in the data that we want to append, where in this case, what data are we appending? What data are we appending? Exactly, which is going to be the first argument that we pass in along with a new line character. Then we're going to pass in a callback. Remember, a callback is very important to us. Why is a callback important? What is the callback doing in this specific use case? If there is an error, and then what? Exactly, and so if there's no error, it's going to say commit is logged. This is good user feedback. This is UX at the terminal level. You need to have some type of feedback that what you've done is correct. So let's execute this function. Let's see. This is exercise 7. Let's solved. First of all, we're going to cat out log.txt. It has first in it. We know that the problem we're trying to solve is appending to a file. We've already seen that the write file will completely override a file. In this exercise, we just want to append to it. So we're expecting that this first comment will also have a whatever it is that we pass in along with a new line character. So let's do node index.js. I'm not even going to pass in anything. It's going to tell me it was successful. It tells me it's successful even though potentially didn't do what we wanted it to do. When we cat out log.txt, it's going to append undefined. Why is that? Exactly. But why did it print out undefined? Exactly. It looked for it, it couldn't find it, and it gave it a default value, which is undefined. JavaScript is always going to try to do its best to execute successfully, even though its best is not what we want it to do. In the real world scenario, we're going to want to check for undefined. We're going to want it to say that, okay, if this is undefined, throw an error, maybe execute, maybe exit the application immediately, or maybe print out a message to your user saying, hey, buddy, I'm not expecting undefined for this particular argument. Give me something else. So right now we're going to do this again. We're going to pass in maybe 23. It's going to tell me the commit is logged, so that when I cat out the log file, we're now going to see first, undefined, and 23. And just going to do this so on and so forth as we're appending to the file. Questions on this solution?
So does the append file also create the file?
Let's see what happens. You know, when in doubt, you know, you guys have a terminal. Let's figure this out. Let's remove log.txt. ls log.txt no longer exists. We're going to execute this. 23. Commit is logged, so it's successful. Let's see what happens. ls log.txt exists. Let's see what's inside. 23. So, you know, one of the best ways to learn, to be honest, is really just trial and error. If there's a use case that you want to understand how it works, or or curious about what would happen in particular use cases, just do it. There's nothing stopping you from breaking things. Breaking things is how we learn. So, moving on, we're going to talk about something called modularization. Modularization is pretty much a very fancy word for importing libraries. The very same way you guys were importing jQuery on the front end to use jQuery functions, the same way you were importing bootstrap libraries through the script tags or the CSS tags. That's the front end way of saying I want to use these libraries on my front end. In Node.js, we're going to use a keyword called require. That's me saying I want to import some functions from somewhere. We saw earlier that the functions we wanted to import were already given to us. which was like FS. FS is a file system standard library. All we have to do is require FS, and we can use this already importable library. Now, if I want to create a custom library, let's say one of your classmates has created a pretty cool function, and they only have it in a JavaScript file, but you want to use it locally. You can just import that local file. You could download their file, do require, and then the absolute path of that JavaScript file, and then now you have access to all the functions within this badmath.js. So, without even looking at badmath.js, I know that it has some variable pi and some function predictable. How do I know predictable is a function? Parentheses. That's usually a good indicator that it's a function. Let's confirm. So if we take a look at badmath.js, we can see that, okay, pi is a variable, and then there exists another variable called predictable, which is actually a function, an anonymous function. So this is our way of naming an anomalous function by passing it the variable, assigning that function to the variable predictable. But this is the special keyword that gives us access to those variables. It's called module.exports. Special keyword in Node.js, which pretty much it's a way of exporting functionality out of a JavaScript file, so other JavaScript files can use it. So we're saying in this particular example, export the variable pi to a keyword pi. This keyword does not have to actually be pi. It could be, I don't know, dog. But it's going to give me the value that exists within pi. So let's say an index.js. I'm going to execute this function. Let me head over there. This is number 8. I'm going to node.js, blah, 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 index.js. When I execute it, it's going to tell me that it's undefined because in this code right now, it's still looking for a variable called pi. I have now renamed that variable. On badmath.js, pi is now dog. So that's why it's printing out undefined. So if I go back and change this to dog, save the file, execute this one more time, it's going to show me apple, which is actually the variable pi. Just want to reinforce that you're not forced to use the same name as an exportable library name. It could be something human readable. Maybe when you were writing your code, you gave it a very ugly name and you don't feel like changing it. For everybody else that now wants to use your library, they could use maybe a more human readable, friendly name. So also, what else? So yeah, so then we also have the predictable function, which all it does, it just returns 1. That's why it's predictable. And we're assigning this function to the predictable key, which can also be named, I don't know, return 1 function. And so then within index.js, we would import badmath.js, assign it to a variable so that we can use it, and then call the functions that we know are available to us, and then execute this file, and we're going to see apple and 1. Of course, if we do anything that does not exist, return 2, which doesn't exist, we're just going to get an error. This is not a function. This is not something badmath has exported for us to use. To continue to reinforce that, turn 1, I'm going to create another variable, cat equals, I don't know, Molly, whatever. So we have a variable called cat that also now exists within badmath. We can go back to index.js and console log badmath.cat. Let's see what happens. Undefined. Why is that? We never exported it. It is not available to the library using it. It's as if it doesn't exist because you have to explicitly say, these are the set of variables and functions I want other users to be able to use. Everything else is private to my specific library. That's what module exports is doing. Questions on that? So in the next exercise that we'll work on for the next 10 minutes will be you guys elaborating on bad math, but we're going to do good math, and instead create functions that take in parameters and then do logical things like summing it, minusing it, stuff like that. So let me slack out those instructions. And in the same way we saw in this exercise with bad math, you're going to create a file called math.js, which is going to have functions that we're going to export within math.js. And then within the index.js file, we're going to require it, and then we're going to use it to execute the work that we would need it to do, which will be taking in 2 arguments and then doing some type of math, which would be, for this example, we're doing sum, the difference, the product, and the quotient. So we'll do this for the next 10 minutes. And let me know if you have any questions. Now we can break out this exercise into different steps. First step, take the 2 arguments. Make sure they're assigned to variables. Second step, create the math file. Ensure that we're able to create functions that take in 2 arguments that we had passed in and print out something. Third step, export those functions and use them within index.js. And you can slowly build towards the solution. Another tip, if you guys are ever running into roadblocks, there's nothing wrong in copy and pasting from the previous exercise and then working backwards to kind of edit that exercise and force the logic to do what we want it to do. Two more minutes and then we'll talk about the solution. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the solution for this exercise. Um, let's walk through doing one of the very first cases together, which would be the sum function. We know from the instructions on the exercise we need to create two files, index.js and math.js. Within the math.js we have to create a couple functions and then pass in the arguments retrieved from index.js and into the functions that math.js provides us. So we'll have an empty math.js file. We can now maybe copy and paste the modules exports from the bad math just so that it kind of speeds up our development time because we know it does something of what we want, except the biggest changes will be in the things that we want to export. We know that there's going to be a key sum that gets assigned to, I don't know, a sum numbers function. So sum numbers function needs to exist. So we could possibly do var sum numbers equals function that takes num1, num2, and then returns the addition of those arguments. Everything seems pretty straightforward so far. We're creating a function that takes two arguments and that it gets assigned to a function called sum numbers, and we're exporting that function sum numbers through a modules.export. I'm going to confirm in badmath.js. My syntax looks a little off. There's no parentheses over here. We just go back and change that. Boom. So now I go back to index.js and I'm going to require that math function because that is the one that I actually want to use. It doesn't matter, I can leave the bad math there. They're assigned to different variable names which are going to be unique, so they're not going to conflict when I want to use them. I don't care about all that stuff. We're going to console.log. Let's do just math, the variable. Let's see what happens when we do that. No, I would not like to purchase node index.js. And when we console log out just that math variable, we're going to see that it has a key called sum. And that sum is assigned to a function called sum numbers. Now we have some type of verification that at least our exporting is working correctly. That's what I'm saying. When you guys are building out these exercises, step by step, you just want to console log and just keep console logging to make sure that things are doing what you want it to do. I haven't even used a function, but I know that a function sum exists. So now I could do something like console.log math.sum, and let's see, what do we see over there? Okay, that's going to output the function sum numbers. That's what we expected. I'm going to execute sum. Let's see what happens when we do that. Nan, that's another like null value in Node. That's saying it didn't know what to do with the result that I passed in. So it just gave me a nan value. That's because I didn't give it any variables. So let's give it an argument, 2 and 3, because I know that's what math is taking in. It has a function that takes in 2 arguments and adds them together and returns a value. So what I'm expecting is 2 plus 3. We're going to execute this function. Now it prints out 5. Now we have confirmation that our function is doing what we want it to do, and we're able to export it from the math file in the way that we want it to do. Now we add some type of dynamic elements to our function, which would be using the process.argv values. That would be the second index and then also the third index. So now I'm going to pass in those elements. And let's do 3 and 3. And you're going to see that it's giving me 33. Why did it give me 33? What's up? Exactly. It turned those integers that I passed in into strings and just added them together on the back end. Once again, it didn't give me an error, but it didn't do what I wanted it to do. How would I fix that? Exactly, we'd have to convert it to an integer, and I believe that's covered in the solution. If it's not, we'll walk through it. So let's take a look at the solution. In the solution, they have multiple functions that take 2 arguments each. For sum, it's just going to add them together. For the difference, it's going to minus them, so on and so forth, and they're going to assign them to keys that we can use. They did this in a shortcut way. They just created the functions directly within the module.exports. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to go the long route that I did, which is assigning them to variables and then assigning the key to those variables. You can skip all of that and just do it directly within the modules.exports. It's up to you on what you think looks cleaner or how you want people to read your code. Then, if you look at the index.js, you can see that they're using a function, parseInt, because as you saw earlier, it did not do what I wanted it to do. It took those 2 strings and just tacked them on together and called it a day. It didn't actually evaluate them as integers. And then based on the operation, it's going to look for the case sum. So we're going to pass in 3 arguments. Let's actually navigate there. Solved. Okay, so what this looks like is going to be node index.js sum 3, 4. What it does with these arguments is that it's going to take that very first argument to determine what type of function do I want to execute right now. I know I wanted to use the sum case, so I'm going to use a switch statement that's going to read based on the operation, which is sum. And for the sum case, I'm going to console log out math.sum and the 2 arguments that were passed in, which would be at index 3 and index 4. And then with the switch case, we can also have a default case where if you pass in an operation that doesn't exist, let's say blah, it's just going to default and say check your maths. This function does not exist. Any questions on the solution that you see? And how we broke out the individual steps of creating the function, exporting the function, confirming we could actually use that function before we even worried about taking in arguments and parsing those arguments and doing all this other stuff. There's a lot of ways that you can confirm your logic without even building the entire product. So if there's no questions, let's move on to exercise 10. So in exercise 10, we're now introducing a new variable called npm. I'm going to search Google npm. I'll slack this out. The only use cases we've been doing currently is 1, using inbuilt libraries that Node gives you by default, like file system, or 2, local files that maybe your friend has emailed to you and now you've added it to your application. In the real world, companies can't email each other code. I mean, they could, but it's not very efficient. So something called npm, which is a Node package manager, was created, and it's kind of like a cloud resource for all the open source libraries out there. So in the same way that you guys could use things like the Bootstrap CDN that's always readily available for you guys to be able to download Bootstrap when you do load your websites without having Bootstrap locally within your file system. It's the same way NPM works. It's kind of like a cloud CDN for open source libraries. So your friend could upload his math library to npm js.com, and then you could install that locally within your computer and then use it in your code base. So an example of this would be, let's see, within this exercise, in my index.js, I'm requiring a library called badmath, and badmath is going to console log out pi, and it's going to console log out predictable. So let's go there. So the only file I have in here is index.js. So when I execute this file, I'm going to see an error. Why is that? Yeah, badmath doesn't exist. Remember, in previous examples, the file badmath lived alongside your index.js. So you could just say require badmath is going to look within the local path. It's just going to import it immediately. Makes life a lot easier. But in the real world, an npm comes installed when you install Node. So you're going to have access to the binary file, a log file, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, where's that file? Ready to go. Okay, well, let's try that first. npm init. Skip. All right. Now, it should have just installed badmath locally regardless of that. Okay. Well, that's new. I'm learning something new today. So, in the newer versions, yeah, I was a little confused by that. All right, so that's a good point. In older versions, you didn't need something called a package.json. So it kind of messed up the flow in which I want to talk about this. So let's talk about package.json first. Package.json is kind of like your application description. It's going to be a JSON file that includes the name of your application, which I defaulted to just my directory name. It's going to include the version of your application, which is typically going to be version 1 if you're building from scratch. It's going to have a description. It's going to have a main key, which tells it how to execute your application, which would be through the index.js. We can ignore the scripts key for now. The author, which would be you, license that you want to use. There's many open source licenses out there. And of course, the dependencies that we're using, which is badmath. Because we're kind of doing this out of order, let's go back to package, to npm init. So let me delete everything. Remove rf net modules, remove package, lock, remove package JSON. Okay, so when you are creating an application, the very first thing you want to do, if you want to use third-party libraries, is to do an npm init, which is initialize. I want to initialize my application as something that uses third-party libraries. When I hit npm init, you're going to walk through a I don't know, what do they call these? A workflow of all the different things that you need to initialize your package.json. It's almost like a helper function, so that you don't have to do all this stuff yourself. So I would actually like everyone to do npm init right now on their local, and we're going to walk through this together because I want you to see your package.json get executed or get created. All right. Now you can do this in any folder location, wherever it's easiest for you. And when you do npm init, you should see this screen pop up. To your it's just a way to kind of define how your application is going to be executed. I'm just going to default to index.js, test command, we're going to pass that, exit, skip, just clicking enter to skip all this stuff, manual, license, that's fine. And then what it's going to do is going to say, is going to print out, is going to write to a package.json file if it doesn't already exist, and this is going to be the contents that it's going to write to it, which would be the name that I passed in earlier, the version 0.00, description, test package, and then the main index.js. Is this okay? Yes. That's it. And what you should see over here is that your package.json is now created. Did everyone's package.json get created? And if it did not, let me know immediately. There's something very wrong going on in your local environment. Cool. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that we now have a library that we want to use, but we don't have it locally. And we know, that the library is called badmath. So I'm going to do npm install badmath. Is going to create a lock file. A lock file you can think of as a snapshot in time of your library dependencies. So we're saying, if we look at the package dash lock file, that this library, this library badmath, we're using the version 1.01, is going to give us a SHA integrity. This is very important so that, let's say you try and install a badmath library from, I don't know, a bad actor website or something. This is going to be the confirmation that, well, I wanted this to be downloaded from registry npm.js.org, not emmanuel.org. So if you try to install badmath from emmanuel.org, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't know how to resolve it because your package lock is saying, no, that's not the badmath I want. The one I want is on npm.js.org. So you can just think of the lock file as a way to ensure security that your application is installing the dependencies that you wanted to install. Next, you're going to see another folder got created called Node modules. As we saw earlier, module.export is a way of providing a means to use library functions. So within a folder called Node modules, these are going to be a list of all the libraries that our application is using. So when I look inside of it, I'm going to see a folder called badmath. And badmath is going to have its own index.js that has its own module.export and its own functions and all the different things that I want to use. So that when I do node index.js, I'm going to be able to reuse those functions that I already want to use, which is going to be the pi variable and the predictable function. Once again, yep.
Sorry, the install function did it. What was the sorry, I didn't check the folder before we did all these folders.
Yeah.
Was the badmath function really installed into
No. The badmath file did not exist and it was not pre-installed. The only thing we had was an index.js file.
How was it able to create badmath?
And that's exactly where npm comes into play. So when we created our package.json, we're pretty much initializing our application to say we are now going to download libraries from a third party. And the only way we can do that is by having a package.json file. And we're going to use npm to facilitate downloading those libraries. So for our class example, the library that we want to download is called badmath. And you can confirm that this exists on npm by going to npm.org, searching badmath. Yes, it's online. And here it is. It's going to be badmath version 1.1. It's a public repository. That means we're able to download this. It's not private. It was published 6 months ago. Badmath for Learning Good. Let's see. It's a 35 KB. It has a homepage. Who's this guy? Jared Nielsen. Oh, he works here. Okay. He threw up this package. You check out his GitHub page. See if he's doing any work. Yes. So npm.js is going to be the website that you install most of your open source libraries. Almost all open source libraries are on npm.js. Cool. Yeah, all sorts of libraries. So let's go to the home page and search around a little bit. Actually, everybody navigate to npm.js.com and play around with me. So let's see. When you go there, you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff about stuff. There used to be like these are our latest libraries, check them out. But I guess it doesn't exist anymore. So now, I don't know, we know we're going to eventually learn about Express. So let's search Express. And if we click that, it's going to tell you that it's a fast, unopinionated, minimalistic web framework for Node. And you can read all about how to install it, how to actually build basic routes, how many times it's been downloaded. It shows it's very popular, 6 million people in just this week, things like that. Let's look up something like popular npm packages. Yeah, there we go. Most dependent upon packages in npm. And you'll see that Lodash is always downloaded, React, Requests, Express, Moment. We're all familiar with Moment from our previous exercises. This is where everybody stores all their code and reusable code. So if you have code that you want to share with your classmates, you're going to upload it to npm.js. They have a walkthrough. We're not going to walk through that. And then your classmates will just be able to do npm install, whatever the name is of your library. It's going to be a unique name. And then you're going to have that locally to play around with. So back again, just to reiterate what we just walked through. We have an index.js file that requires a bad math library that did not exist locally. As you can see, I did not do dot // That means it's not within my local file system. If it's not within my local file system, I need to npm install it. That would be npm install badmath. It's going to reach out to npm.js and is going to see if badmath exists. If badmath does not exist, let's call this badmath_Emmanuel. It's going to give me an error. The 404 says not found. Badmath Emmanuel does not exist. But because we know badmath does exist, it created a lock file, installed badmath, and then updated my package.json. Where is that? At the very bottom. Whoops, not this one. This package.js. It's going to update my package.json with dependencies key, with badmath, and with the version that we have installed. Any questions on that? Cool. So we're actually going to walk through an exercise. That exercise, let me confirm that I'm giving you the right one. Yeah, go to exercise 13. In exercise 13, we're going to run npm init, and then we're going to follow the prompts and enter all the different things that we just did again, just to kind of reinforce what we're doing. And then once your package.json file is created, you're going to npm install a library called Inquirer. This should go by really quickly, so when you have free time afterwards, maybe you want to Google what is Inquirer on npm.js and take a look at what it's supposed to do. We're not going to use it, we're just going to install it. So I'm going to slack this out so we walk through these steps again, because repetition is key. And we're going to do exactly what we just did earlier. npm init to create your package.json file in a brand new empty folder, and then we're going to npm install Inquirer -- save. Any questions on what we're doing right now? So now the second command, npm install Inquirer, you will see it's now installed in this now. Yeah. I tacked on a bonus exercise in case you run through that really quickly. You want to play around with some other stuff. Yeah, number 13. We'll do this for another 2 more minutes, and then we'll walk through this together real quick. All right, let's walk through this exercise real quick together. What I've done is I've created a brand new folder called test, which is empty. It doesn't even have a index.js. Within that folder, I'm going to do npm init. It's going to tell me that my package name is test. Sure, that's fine. Version 1, description, test, app. Entry point, yeah, sure. That doesn't exist yet, but I don't care. Enter, enter. Just going to use the default for everything. It's going to tell me, is this okay? Yes, this is fine. So now the only file I see locally will be my package.json. Let's do cat da, 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 da. Yep, it's showing me exactly what I wanted to show. Then I'm going to look at my exercise. It's going to tell me to npm install Inquirer. Let's do that. npm install Inquirer. It's going to reach out to npm.js. Does Inquirer exist? If it does, it's going to install all that stuff locally by creating a package lock.json. As you can see, that exists, and then it also creates a folder called node modules. When I look inside node modules, I will see a whole bunch of dependencies that Inquirer requires to work, which is perfectly fine. The only thing we care about is Inquirer library got installed, and along with all the many dependencies that it needs to do its job. So as you can see, it added 37 packages from 29 contributors and audited 38 of those packages in yada 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 time. And we know that the version we installed is version 7.03. Questions on this exercise? It's pretty straightforward on how to install different packages. If you had some time, you might have been curious to see what Inquirer actually does. And you can see that it's a collection of common interactive command line user interfaces. And then we scroll down to look at the examples, because I usually learn best based on examples. I can see that Inquirer provides us a prompt. We've seen prompt before. We've seen prompt at the front end. You might have been wondering, okay, if Node doesn't come with prompt by default, these are going to be things that users have probably already fixed or resolved for you in the past. A lot of times with development, we find ourselves reinventing the wheel when we really don't need to. There's a lot of open source libraries out there that have already done the work that we don't have to do. So somebody said, well, I need a good way to provide some type of prompt to users to get information. Inquirer is the way to do so. So they created this library Inquirer. This allows me to pass in some questions as a prompt, and then I can take those questions and do whatever I want to do with them. In a gist, that's what Inquirer does. It does a whole bunch of other things, but for our very base case that we care about, prompt will be what we'll be using in one of the next exercises. Who was not able to install Inquirer locally, or did not get to that point? If you did not, definitely reach out to your TAs. It's definitely very fundamental that you guys get this down packed. Another cool thing that you could do, let me make sure I get the syntax correct. If you look at the, so in my test folder, I have a package.json. Is that it? That's not the right one. This is it. It is. Wait a second. Oh no, this is it. This has my dependency Inquirer in the dependencies list, but there might be times when you guys have just development-specific dependencies. These development-specific dependencies are going to be things like test libraries or, yeah, it's mainly just going to be test libraries. These are going to be things that you don't want in your production application, because your production application doesn't need to have all your different test libraries. So, but the way to kind of break that out is, let's say I wanted to install, I don't know, let's go back to bad math. Install bad math as a test environment, dependencies. I can save it as, I can use a flag called save dev, and what this does is it updates my package.json to have a separate list of dependencies, and they're just for local development. So when I'm locally developing, it's going to install bad math as a local environment, but when I'm deploying to production, the only library it will use is Inquirer. Now, the cool thing about a package.json is that you don't need to know the libraries to install if this is your first time using a repo. So if this is my first time using the test app, and I know test app has a package.json, let me delete my node modules. Modules. The only thing that exists is package.json and a package lock file. None of my libraries exist.
Sorry, what is the test app? Test library?
What is a test library?
Sorry.
Oh, like an example of one?
No, what is it like?
Oh, so let's say you want to write unit tests or something. Node has some unit test libraries that you might maybe use in the future, and you don't want your unit test libraries to end up in your production app because it doesn't need to be there. It could be there, but it doesn't need to be there. So just a way of cleaning up your code and having separation of concerns. Yeah. So because we know our package.json has its dependencies already listed, you don't need to go into your package.json and say, okay, I know I need Inquirer, let's npm install Inquirer. Okay, I know I need bad math, let's npm install bad math. You could just do npm install. We're going to install all of them for you. So then when we look at our node modules, we're going to see bad math along with Inquirer, which will be over here. You're going to see that the default behavior for install is install both the dev dependencies and the regular dependencies. If you wanted to add a separation of concerns, let's see, remove node modules. I believe the syntax is npm install production. Let's see. Let's confirm. Alright, so before we added 38 packages, which was the default use case. Then with production, we said only install the libraries in the dependencies field and only install 37 packages. So when I take a look at my node modules, I should not see bad math. I don't see bad math. That's because it's one of my dev dependencies. May not be a useful use case for you guys during this boot camp. It's just a helpful tip to know for the future when you do get into the development world and there is a separation of concerns. Any questions on this? One more flag I want to talk about real quick is we learned about npm install production. We learned about npm and save dev for like dev specific dependencies. But you could also add something called -g, which is global. What's a good line you can install globally? Patient. What this will do is this whole time we've been installing locally. So let me Control C. Locally, when you do npm install, you'll create a node modules folder for your specific application. So you'll have multiple directories with multiple applications, and they'll all have their own node module with their own specific libraries. -g will install a library globally to your node process. So if there's a library you want to use for all your applications, you would do npm-g install, and then you would install it to your global node process. This is useful for tools that like do linting or like even test libraries. If you didn't want to have them included in your applications, but you use the same test libraries across all your apps, you could do things like that. I don't advise it. I would typically say you want to have local libraries to local apps and have a separation of concerns. But if there are things that you just use globally across the board, you can install it globally to your node process. You can see that when I actually do an ls and I take a look at my node modules, you'll see that JS does not exist in this list of libraries that got installed, and it was not included or updated in my package.json. That's because it's being installed to the node processor library directly. That means for this version of Node, which you see over here, version 12.14, will always have JS or JS hint? Yeah, JS hint installed to it globally for all applications. In that same vein, you can always uninstall if that's not what you want. So npm uninstall -g JS hint and removed all packages. So just something to keep in mind. We have 30 minutes left, and I want to hop into the next exercise, which will be an Inquirer. We're going to be working on exercise 15, but let me show you a demo real quick. So everyone navigates to exercise 15 while I get this demo up and running. Okay. Move these node modules. Okay. So in the demo, which will be exercise 14, I'm going to have a package.json that has the Inquirer application, the Inquirer library, and you'll notice that I'm using version 6.5, but the latest version is version 7. Doesn't really matter. npm.js will maintain all the previous versions for as long as the maintainer of this library cares to have them public. It'll have a package.json.lock and have an index.js that requires Inquirer. I will go and try and execute this index.js, and it's going to give me an issue saying it cannot find the module Inquirer. What am I missing? What's up? You say loud is the correct answer. The node module. Yeah, the node module. That's what we're missing right now, because if you look at this folder and I ls in it, I have my index.js and I have my package.json files, but no node modules. That means this library is still existing in the cloud, but it hasn't been installed to my local computer. I could do npm install, which is just a shortcut to say all the libraries stated in my package.json, install them. So now it's going to install them. It's going to add 35 packages for the Inquirer demo. I'm going to now execute the index.js, and you'll see that now my application is executing correctly. Within this application, it's going to ask me what my name is. See manual. It's going to ask me for a password. Ask me for another password to confirm. If I did not type in the correct password, it's going to tell me you forgot your password already. I'm going to execute this again. Type in the same password both times, and now I get a success output. This is pretty much what we're going to build for the next 20 minutes. Any questions on what we're looking for? So if you look at exercise 15, what did they give you? They don't give you anything, but I will I will slack out the instructions and walk through some steps on what you guys need to be doing. So first things first, you're going to need the documentation for Inquirer. The simplest way to do that is go to google.com. We know it's going to be an npm package. It's going to be Inquirer. When we Google npm Inquirer, the very first link is going to be to the npmjs.com website. We click on that, and then we can just walk through the documentation. How do I install Inquirer, npm install Inquirer, and just walk through some of the examples that they show us over here. I'm not gonna. One of the biggest tasks of this exercise is actually reading the documentation and trying to apply what you read in your code, because this is pretty much going to be the same cycle you go through every day as a developer. Reading documentation, applying what you read. So you're going to take this example from the main website and then use it to, one, create prompts for what is your name, what is the languages you know, and what is your preferred method of communication. Sounds like a lot, so maybe in the very first pass you skip everything else and just do what is your name. Start with a very simple use case. If you can get that working, then work on the others. Don't forget that when you within that folder, you're going to have to npm initialize your folder. That's a way of being able to say, I want to install third-party libraries like Inquirer. So npm init, then npm install Inquirer. Once you get those basics down, take a stab at this. We'll talk about the solution in about 20 minutes. And once again, you have access to the previous exercise, exercise 14, that has Inquirer code. Maybe the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes would be reading through that code and making sure you understand what's going on, because you're going to be using those same functions for this next exercise, but asking different questions. Pause the stream.